Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted on this episode to be having a second talk. It's always nice when people come back. Second talk with comics creator, author, artist Chris Schweizer. Chris, thank you for jumping in and joining.
It is absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me again. I'm
Anytime.
glad to be here.
Well, glad that you're glad, and glad to have you as well. Uh, and so, also glad to be talking about a post that I recently saw of you creating something that looked like an exhibit of kids' graphic novel artwork. Is that right? Is that
Yeah,
happening?
I'm hanging that up today. I curated and put together a show a little while ago. I thought of it on a whim. We have a really, we're in a pretty rural area, but one of our sort of our crown jewel for the community, I think, is for our county is that we have a really nice fine arts center that's a mix of a gallery and a performing arts center.
Hmm.
um, that was endowed a number of years ago, and it's in great shape. My wife is heavily involved in it. I've done a show there before a number of years ago, after we moved to Madisonville, but quite a while back. So maybe 2016, 2017, something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I had an idea that it might be neat to do an exhibit showcasing original artwork by some of the people behind various graphic novels and comics that are published, either with a kid audience in mind or that have been embraced by a kid audience. And so I reached out to a number of creators, and a lot of them lent a piece for the show. Sadly, the lending is before any conventions where I will see them, and will be going on during conventions where I will also see them. So I wasn't able to pick anything up in person, and I won't be able to drop anything off in person. So everything had to be through the mail, which is a little clunky. No, nobody, cartoonists don't like going having to go to the post office.
Yeah, yeah.
So I appreciate the. I mean, nobody does, but we're an especially desk goblin people. And so I really appreciate everybody, breaking out of that pattern to send some stuff in. And I had a number of pieces, in our household collection as well. Some are things that were drawn from my daughter. Some are pieces that I've traded with other folks, going back to when I started. So probably about half the show is like Schweitzer House collection as well, which is great because it means fewer people that I had to excuse me, reach out to.
Yeah.
But the so we've got about 40, I think about 40 pieces in there. So it's a really nice breadth of creators and of stuff going back uh for a little while. Like I don't have any super old stuff. I think the oldest thing I have in there is some Alex Toth. Um and then most everything else is like 90s onwards. Or even 2000s onwards. So just because you can't really get your hands on a John Stanley or
Yeah,
a,
yeah.
a Charles Schultz. So or at least I can't. But the show is going on during, and we did this on purpose. We coordinated it to be this time, during the performing arts camps for the community. So the next 3 weeks are daily performing art camps for elementary up through high school, and or no, I guess the next 2 weeks are middle school and high school, and then the week after that is elementary. But it's going to be hundreds and hundreds of kids like cycling through the space, and all their family and parents and brothers and sisters will be coming for the performances, and then the community theater musical will be the week after that, and so a lot of people coming for that. So it's going to be a lot of good family foot traffic going through, and I feel like something like that. Some kids might think it's neat, some might ignore it. There's probably going to be at least a couple that hadn't necessarily processed that these creative jobs were done by individuals,
Mhm, mhm.
for on their own to create these projects. And that may spark something. It might be in art, it might be in music, it might be in writing, it might be in any number of things. But it's really easy when you're a kid to not think about the fact that some of these things are, have a starting point, and that starting point is a person, and that you can be that person. And I think that being able to make people aware of that, it can be really powerful.
Love that. I love that. Love the showcasing of other artists in your community. And then, of course, being a teacher as well, I love the connection to young readers, writers, creators,
Mhm.
and that idea of helping kids see themselves as maybe potentially this is something that I want to do, or even something that I just want to try to practice with to express something I have that I want to share.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we talked last time, you were doing kind of I think it was a cutout, kind of a holiday, maybe a Christmas oriented kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So I love how you play with different forms of creating that way and have your hand in so many different areas.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. I'm consciously trying to not do that for the next year or so. I really want to shift back into making comics, mostly
Mhm.
exclusively, and comics adjacent stuff. Drawn art that gets printed on paper,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the last, mostly just because the last couple of years, the last year definitely, I have done indulged a lot of nonsense. Like, it's been basically a monetized hobby year, and that's not bad. But I'm going to continue doing the Santa workshops and things like that. But I'm that's probably the extent of what I'm going to be doing with the wood image transfer stuff.
Hmm, hmm.
Just because it's very labor intensive, it's very time intensive.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I may have mentioned this last time, but I did not mean to essentially create a factory job for myself. And that's what I did in making these. When I'm doing two of them, it's a joy. I'm sitting there like in my little peddler's apron, and
Mm,
hammering like tiny things with a little pegs with a mallet, and putting things together and sliding it up, and it looks great, and it's all done. I dust off the sawdust and it looks wonderful. And when you're doing 60 of those, it loses its novelty really fast. Not so much because it's not fun to do, but because you're doing it at the expense of doing drawing, doing
hmm,
pages,
hmm.
doing commissions, doing anything else like that. And um, so I am looking to. I'm not going to have a chance to do it this month, but I'm hoping that next month I can revisit how I have those assembled, because basically I do most of the assembly myself and send it off, and it's kind of complex. And what I should have done from the beginning is figure out a simple, sturdy assembly approach that the customer can do, and
Hmm,
just flat
hmm.
ship it to them and let them do it, and then only have to deal with the wood, getting the wood on the board, or getting the image on the wood. And so if I can do that, then that will allow me to increase how many orders I can take, because I had to cap it due to just my bandwidth. And it's
Yeah,
something that I think a lot of people would enjoy and would have fun with. But yeah, I enjoy that, and it does inform the comic. Like, anytime that I have to build something physically, it makes my design sense better for comics. My perspective
mm,
gets better. My uh theoretical engineering gets better. Like,
hmm, hmm.
what machinery in a book will look like will work better if I create a bridge or a house. Like, it's going to have more to do with reality, or how it would physically work, than it would had I not been doing those, trying to put things together and realizing my measurements were off. So I do think there's definitely a value in it that informs the rest. But I miss having books come out. I miss telling
Yeah.
stories, and so I'm really excited to be moving back into that space. I just uh, sent a revised, based on his earlier things, and pitch to my agent for a graphic novel. Well, I sent it to him a little while ago. We just had a meeting about it yesterday. That's pretty in line with what I like to do. My last couple of books have been kind of assigned, I guess, by the publisher.
Mm-hmm.
Like they've approached me and said, "Would you want to do a book about this?" And I've said, "Sure," but I haven't really um, done something from the ground up where it's all the stuff that I like, which is sword fights and uh, how to deal with injustice and Appalachian scenery and all this stuff. So
Yes, yeah.
it's going to be a hodgepodge, and I'm really excited to be doing to assuming it gets picked up, but we're pretty confident that it will. So
Awesome, awesome. Well, love the Appalachian scenery as well. And you said theoretical engineering, so I might have to borrow that. I might have to borrow that at some point when I'm writing about something. That's a great description. So you were talking about getting back to books and creating, and I was going to point out you have this wonderful range of creating from the history comics to comics for kids. You have comics for adults, the Mars Attacks work I think we talked about last time, collaborations with Kyle Starks. So you have this really nice range. Is there a particular space that you're looking to sort of expand into next? Or
it's
revisit, I should say.
that I haven't done. I guess probably revisit. I want to get back into um, doing some stuff for sort of late middle reader. I feel like they're
Mm-hmm.
one of the areas that we kind of, and it's probably banging your head against the wall trying to hit this market, but one of the areas that I think publishing has not really hit as well as it has some other demographics is like the middle school boy grade.
Mm-hmm.
Which granted right now you're competing with video games, you're competing with some other stuff, but I think there is a I mean, like there's a lot of great kids books out there, there are a lot of great YA books out there. There's not as many, or at least I have not seen as many of that in between age, which manga serves very well. A lot of shonen stuff is very sort of hyper targeted at that market.
Yeah.
And I think that basically it's how, uh, at what age can you still lean towards kids, but also lean into gratuitous violence, or not
Right, right.
gratuitous violence? Like, I mean, I tend to, you know, care when I'm using violence in the stories, but I
Mm-hmm.
like physical conflict in narrative. Like I think that it's engaging. It's a you can look at it as metaphorical, for the types of, how our conflicts largely and thankfully do not devolve into life or death physical struggles. It's us yelling at our coworkers or our classmates or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that being able to see these sort of dramatized out in these mythic ways is cathartic and exciting and fun, and also a good chance to play with how you do action staging and all the formal elements of comics that I really enjoy. um and also the only sports I were ever good at were conflict, or were like violence based sports, like kickboxing or things along those lines.
Yeah,
And I say
yeah.
good. The only sports I weren't bad at, I should say. And I did other stuff. I did basketball in high school. I did soccer in high school, but I was lousy at both of them. I just, I was uh, tall, and so I was on the basketball team, and I, existed, and I was on the soccer team because at that point it was not a thing that everybody did. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, but I was lousy at both of them. And I wasn't terrible at kickboxing. Um, so I like to see that kind of stuff reflected in stories.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was smiling a bit ago because you're talking to somebody that was an eighth grade English teacher for 8 years. And so I know exactly the age that you're talking about, and I know sort of the struggle you sometimes have as somebody that's trying to get books for that age group. And you're absolutely right. It's like, well, this is a little too young, but we don't want to go full young adult yet. And it's a tricky, tricky spot. So I'm glad that you're thinking about that audience.
Yeah, and I've been watching some manga, or excuse me, I've been watching some anime with my daughter. Especially she's 14, so especially My Hero Academia she really likes. And that is to some degree informing how I'm thinking about stuff.
Hmm.
And it's also and reading some as well. Like I hadn't read much manga when I was younger, and now I'm picking up stuff. There's a library that we joined that's about an hour north of us. And so we head up there, and they've got a pretty big selection. So she's been checking out a bunch of stuff. I've been checking out a bunch of stuff, and there's some sensibilities to it that I used to really eschew,
Hmm.
which is the less naturalistic stuff, the more emotionally centered, you know, inner monologue type of things. And I used to not like that, and now I kind of like how it feels like some novels that I like, where the
Hmm.
action moments kind of compress and you contextualize what's happening in a way that in comics when we do it, or in film when you do it, you kind of have to do it as a setup payoff.
Right, right.
Is the only way to introduce that contextualization that allows for a an emotional fulfillment during the fight scene, as opposed to strictly a responsive, like an aesthetic response, I guess. Um, and I think in novels and things along those lines, two people can be having a sword fight, and then it can kind of, if it's a first person narration, it can, I'm thinking there's an author that I really like, Sebastian de Castell, and he does this a lot where, um, it will the fight will start, and it'll be like, the thing you have to know about such and such, and then it'll start to contextualize all this different stuff, and it'll create asides that, one, lengthen out that fight scene, which is always nice,
Yes,
and
yes.
two, introduces a context for how the character is going to win unexpectedly,
Hmm.
without having Chekhov gunned it. I don't know what the past terms of verbing a Chekhov's gun would be, earlier in
That
the
works
story,
for
which is
me.
how we
Yep.
usually do it if we're doing naturalistic depiction of space and time in comics. Like doing a very mimetic approach to storytelling.
Hmm.
And so I really like how in some of these shonen books, you kind of have that as well. You have these inner monologues that are essentially creating the same thing, and I'm trying to get less snobbish about the
Yeah.
aspects of comics. Like, there are things that I don't do. I was talking to Xander Cannon about this, because we share a lot of the same snobbery rules, like no no motion lines, like you show a before or after moment, your sound effects are done a certain way, no this,
Hmm.
no that, no thoughtful, and I think that it's those can be those can be good, I think, but I think they can also be limiting. Like, they can really box you in terms of how you're telling a story.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
if I look at directors like Sam Raimi or Baz Luhrmann, who are just like old kung fu movies or something, or exploitation movies or things like that, they use a lot of what you might think, or what I might think of, because again, I'm a snob, I'm a hillbilly snob, uh, sort of classless uh, techniques. So, like a zoom in for no reason, or
Right, right.
thing like cutting to slow mo, like during an emotional, like things like that are narrative tricks that are used to manipulate your audience in a certain way, and some of them can feel a little bit hackneyed or heavy handed.
Hmm.
Uh, like a whip crack sound effect when somebody turns their head, like stuff that
Right.
sometimes you love. You're watching a spaghetti western, you're like, this is great, or Good, Bad, and the Weird, or whatever it might be, and then sometimes it feels really, really hackneyed. But the thing is, like, Raimi and Lerman and a number of other sort of maximalist directors are, they're using every single tool in the toolbox
Hmm.
to shape the feel of the narrative, to tell the audience what they want the audience to be feeling or knowing. And there's something really powerful about that. And so my natural inclinations butt against that, so I'm trying to be a little less pretentious with how delicate I handle the constructs of a page,
Yeah.
and have
Yeah.
a little more fun with it. And so I was playing a little bit more with the pitch and the sample pages, and I'm really enjoying it. It's going to take a little while before it feels natural,
Hmm.
uh, but that's what I'm striving for. Is to always be growing and sort of pushing your what you can do, not just trying to get better at drawing or better at narrative, but exploring things that you haven't explored before.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's kind of a fun awareness to some of those things too. Like if you know you're using those techniques and you're referencing the techniques and you're
Mhm.
fully embracing that toolbox versus, oh, I think this is kind of what I'm supposed to do here. So whip, crack, head turn. And I'm also loving how you're talking about comics and cinema right there together as well.
Mhm. And there's a lot of stuff that plays like one of the I think a lot of people look to movies for how to influence comics. I've been looking at starting with I started working on an opera project with an opera fellow, Alex Schrader, uh, and it's almost reached fruition. Like there's a Kickstarter related to it that launches next month, and that got me kind of pumped on theatrical stuff, which I hadn't done. I used to be really involved in theater when I was a kid because my dad ran an opera company uh, when I was young, and I was in a lot of opera shows, his and local universities and uh, things along those lines. And I haven't done it at all as an adult, but doing the in the prep work for the opera project, I've been reading a lot of stagecraft books. I've been looking especially at scenography and how different sets are constructed and things like that, and that's influencing how I think about comics as well. So I mean, there's so many different narrative mediums and non-narrative mediums that we can pull from
Mhm.
when we're thinking about how we're gonna put together stuff. And then also in reading about those, and I'm reading about cinematography, and I'm reading about music composition and anything along those lines, you start to encounter phrases that are relatable to things that you do in comics that didn't have terminology. And so that's exciting too, because then you can borrow that for how you are for when you're discussing comics with other people, either from a critique standpoint or teaching standpoint, or when you're just looking at something critically, you're talking about something that you're frustrated with a peer. Like it's neat to have that vocabulary available to you, and the more outside influences that you can pull in, the more uh, vocabulary becomes so accessible.
Yeah, yeah. Now you have also, I can't remember if we talked about this the last time or not, but you've done some teaching at the university level, I believe, as well. Is that right?
Yeah, so I taught for 5 years. I was a professor at the Atlanta campus of the Savannah College of Art and Design in their comics program, which when we started it was pretty small. Like we had a really great teacher to uh, student ratio and an incredible teacher to grad student ratio. And then that I think it's grown to be comparable to the other campuses since then. But it was a really nice little microcosm. We had a whole lot of agency to undertake things how we wanted, which is rare in academic things. Like usually you don't have the degree of freedom that you have, but um, our program coordinator, who is essentially the chair position, Sean Crystal, was, and I mean this in the best possible way. Like he was a bully for our department. Like he would
Mm-hmm.
not accept, uh, you know, less agency that we needed. He would not accept less funding that we needed, and so he would, you know, be really insistent to uh, the dean of our program, who is Pat Quinn, who also really went to bat for us, because of Sean really pushing him for it, and so we really had, we were able to shape that into everything we could possibly want with a department. And the reason I left was just because I couldn't. Once I became a dad, and once we moved away from a train line, which I didn't know we were doing that when we moved. I just assumed that trains, or at the very, if not trains, at the very least, buses hit everywhere
Oh yeah.
in the greater metro Atlanta. And then when we moved and I found out the nearest bus was 7 miles away, I that was a real unpleasant discovery, because that meant I was driving for an hour and a half instead of sitting
Yeah.
and grading papers or writing books or whatever else. And so between being a dad and moving out into the suburbs, I wasn't able to balance my professional and my academic things, and so I had to drop the academic. And then after I did, I think things changed at the school pretty quickly to where it became comparable to most schools,
Mhm.
by which I mean difficult to teach at.
Mhm.
And so I was glad to have stopped when I did because I had nothing but good experiences the whole time that I was there.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
I've had a chance to be a guest instructor in Denmark at the drawing academy there and the animation workshop, which is
Nice.
a really amazing program that they have there that I believe is free to EU students. I think it's very competitive to get in, but it's they have everybody has their own little workshop studio space. Like they have bring in a different stable of instructors on top of their regular instructors. So they have people from all over the world coming in doing really amazing work, and the students are just phenomenal. So I've gotten to do that twice, and that's been a real joy and a real honor to get to be involved in that.
Love it, love it. Well, it sounds like you made a wise and fortuitous choice in
Mhm.
the work that you've done. And I'm walking away from this conversation recognizing that you might be the first person that I've met who has the ability to theoretically engineer, right? Um, probably do the
Emphasis on
stage
the
production,
theoretically. Like my stuff does not come together very well. We should say.
but all of these things you could be like a one man opera if that's a thing, and then relate it back to comics, which is very, very cool to me.
Yeah,
Very
I
cool
can't sing
indeed.
well enough, so that's a factor too. There's a lot of things that I'm sort of okay at, but I'm interested in them, and that's that's fun and that's interesting. And I'm very blessed to be in a position where I can indulge those interests
Mm,
and basically shoehorn them into my job and say, well, right now I'm really interested in scenography, or right now I'm really interested in 1830s romantic popular novelists, or whatever. And whatever my interest is in, I can figure out a way to just cram that into whatever my day job is, and make it somehow viable to some degree or another, which is I recognize as an absolutely rare and exceptional
mhm, mhm.
situation to be in, and it's one that allows me to continually try to, I love learning. I love treating things like school. I'm not in school, but I every time I'm interested in something, like it becomes a thesis. Like I want to research it, I want to study it, I want to learn it inside out, and I'm in a really lucky position to where I get to be able to do that on a
Very
pretty
cool.
regular basis.
Very cool. Well, if I'm a listener out there and I want to know about the Kickstarter campaign that you mentioned,
Mhm.
upcoming appearances, the Art of the Kids graphic novel exhibit, or anything else that you'd like to share, any particular space that you would recommend that folks go?
Or I am less active on social media than I used to be. I am most active on a site called Blue Sky, which is sort of
Hmm.
a replacement Twitter that very few people are on compared to what was on Twitter. So it's sort of more shouting into the void than anything else. But I'm on that. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Tumblr. And like I said, I'm not very active on those in terms of like day to day posting, but I do share when I have events. I share when I have books coming out. I share occasionally I'll share art when I remember it. My handle on all of those is Schweitzer Comics,
Hmm. Hmm.
all one word. And I also have a website, schweitzercomics.com. And that's where I do most of my stuff. I'm also pretty active on Patreon. I have a Patreon account which has a free tier if you just want to follow, like get it like a newsletter and know what's going on. And then at the different paid tiers, there are different rewards that are available to patrons there. And that's been very helpful to me to allow me to do those in those indulgences. I can say, well, I'm really interested in these right now, so I'm going to do some paper figures, or I'm going to do an essay, and the Patreon patrons are essentially supporting those endeavors, which is really nice. Um, so yeah, so those are the main places to find me. And then also, I'm occasionally at shows, most of them on the eastern half of eastern third of the United States. Just because I tend to drive to most shows. And so I do New York Comic Con, I do Dragon Con, I do Heroes Con in Charlotte.
Mhm.
I'm looking to expand that a little bit next year and maybe do 5 shows instead of 4. So we'll see how that goes and maybe do a West Coast show. I'd like to do Emerald City, so I need to look into that.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Chris, thank you for the time. Thank you for the varied creating. Is there anything that we missed that you want to make sure to share before we close?
I don't think so. Thank you so very much for having me on, Jason. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, absolutely, anytime. Thank you so much, and looking forward to the things that are out in pitch mode right now. Looking forward to seeing how those come to be.
All right, fantastic. Well, have a great evening.
You too. Thanks so much.